Nobody wants the fat one, they laughed. But then the mountain man slammed down his silver dollar and roared, "Now that's a woman!" The jeers died in the dust of the auction yard. A woman, mocked and unwanted, was suddenly chosen in front of them all. But why would a lone mountain man stand up for her? When she followed him into the high country, she expected only hardship. Instead, she found a cradle by the fire, an orphaned child, half Apache, that the law was already hunting to take away. Now the whole town is whispering. A deputy sharpens his keys, a rancher eyes the spring under the cabin, and the church bell tolls with judgment. She thought she'd been bought for nothing. But could her courage and a secret deed buried in her family's past be the only thing that saves them all? When a woman scorned by the world is the last one standing between greed and justice, will she finally believe she's worth being chosen? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty auction yard, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. The crowd of farmers, miners, and ranchers pressed together, their boots stirring up clouds of dust as they jostled for position. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the musky scent of unwashed bodies. At the front of the gathering, the auctioneer's platform creaked under his worn boots. His voice carried across the yard, sharp and practiced. "Next up, folks, we got the eldest Mayfield sister. 26 years old, knows her way around a kitchen and field work." He gestured toward Kath Mayfield, who stood with her shoulders pulled back despite the tremble in her hands. Kath kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, trying to shut out the crowd's reaction. She was used to the stares, the whispers about her size, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Her broad shoulders and solid build had served her well on the family farm before the fever took her parents. Now those same attributes drew sneers and mockery. "Look at the size of her," someone called out, triggering a wave of cruel laughter. "She'll eat you out of house and home." "The fat one ain't worth feeding," another voice joined in. The auctioneer's enthusiasm faltered as the jeers continued. He tugged at his vest, clearly considering whether to move on without a sale. "Well now, folks," he said weakly, "surely someone needs a strong pair of hands for their homestead." A movement at the back of the crowd drew attention. A tall figure pushed through the press of bodies, his presence causing people to step aside. Jack Boone's scarred face and weather-beaten clothing marked him as a mountain man, someone more at home in the wilderness than town gatherings. His boots were caked with mud, his rifle slung across his back, speaking of long days on the trail. The crowd's laughter died as Jack strode forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar, its surface catching the late sunlight. Without ceremony, he slammed it down on the auctioneer's table. The sharp crack silenced the remaining murmurs. "Nobody wants her?" Jack's voice was quiet but carried clearly across the yard. "Then she's mine." He looked directly at Kath, his gaze steady and respectful. "Now that's a woman." The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The auctioneer blinked, looking between the silver dollar and the mountain man before him. A few of the townspeople shuffled their feet, some looking away in shame at their earlier behavior. "Well then," the auctioneer cleared his throat, lifting his gavel. "Sold to Mr. Boone." The strike of wood on wood seemed to break the spell. Kath felt her legs trembling as she was led forward. The shame of being auctioned like cattle still burned, but something else flickered in her chest, a spark of gratitude for the quiet dignity in Jack's words. He hadn't praised her beauty or made light of her size, he'd simply named her what she was, a woman worthy of respect. Jack stepped forward to meet her, offering his arm with the same natural courtesy he might show any lady. His scarred hand was steady, his grip gentle but sure as he helped her down from the platform. Up close, Kath could see the lines around his eyes, marks of long days squinting into mountain winds and summer sun. "My cart's just over yonder," he said softly, meant for her ears alone. "If you're ready?" Kath nodded, not trusting her voice yet. The crowd parted as Jack led her to where his mule cart waited. Unlike some of the other men who'd purchased wives today, he didn't hurry her or grab at her arm. He matched his pace to hers, letting her find her footing on the uneven ground. The cart was simple but well-maintained, the mule looking healthy and well cared for. Jack helped her up onto the wooden seat, making sure she was settled before climbing up himself. The leather reins creaked as he took them in hand. Kath sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. The shame of the auction still burned in her cheeks, but it was tempered now by confusion. This quiet mountain man had saved her from humiliation, had spoken up when others only mocked. She didn't know whether to thank him or guard her heart against whatever expectations might come later. The sun was settling towards the horizon as they left town, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. Dust rose behind the cart's wheels, and the steady clip-clop of the mule's hooves marked their passage. The evening breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. The crowd's final whispers faded behind them as the cart rolled past the last buildings of town. Kath watched as the shadow of her old life grew smaller, while ahead the unknown stretched out like the darkening prairie. She stole a glance at Jack's profile, trying to read something of her future in his weathered features. He must have felt her gaze, for he turned slightly toward her. "There's a blanket under the seat," he said, "if you're getting cold." His voice was gruff but not unkind, like he was unused to conversation but trying his best to be thoughtful. Kath reached down and pulled out the worn wool blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly, her first words to him. "For everything." Jack nodded, his eyes on the trail ahead. No need for thanks. What those folks did wasn't right. He adjusted his grip on the reins, then added, "A person's worth ain't measured by how they look. My mama taught me that. God rest her soul." The simple wisdom in his words brought unexpected tears to Kath's eyes. She blinked them away, watching as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The dusk settled around them like a gentle blanket, and with it came a cautious sense of peace. The mule cart rolled on through the gathering darkness, carrying them toward whatever tomorrow might bring. Behind them, the town's lights twinkled and faded, like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The air grew cooler, carrying the night sounds of crickets and the distant call of a whippoorwill. Kath pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, stealing another glance at the quiet man beside her. His earlier words echoed in her mind. "Now that's a woman." Simple words, but they had given her something she hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. Whatever came next, she would hold on to that moment when one person's respect had silenced a crowd's cruelty. The cart continued its steady pace as full darkness settled over the land. The moon rose, casting silver light across the prairie grass, while ahead, the unknown future beckoned like the distant mountains against the star-filled sky. The mule cart creaked along the darkening trail, its wooden wheels finding every rut and stone. Night crept across the land like spilled ink, turning the prairie grass to shifting shadows. Kath pulled the borrowed blanket tighter around her shoulders, studying her silent companion from beneath lowered lashes. Jack Boone sat straight-backed on the wooden seat, reins held loose but ready in his scarred hands. The last light caught the silver, threading his dark hair at the temples, and the deep lines etched around his eyes. His rifle lay within easy reach, a reminder that the frontier held its share of dangers. Every so often, his gaze would sweep the surrounding darkness, alert and watchful. Kath noticed how he guided the mule around the deeper holes without comment, sparing both beast and passengers from unnecessary jostling. It was a small kindness, but one that spoke of consideration. The sound of running water eventually broke through the night's chorus of cricket song. Jack drew the mule to a halt near a creek, its surface catching starlight like scattered silver coins. "We'll rest here," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the still air. "Creek's good for drinking, and there's grass for the mule." He climbed down first, then offered his hand to help Kath from the cart. She hesitated only a moment before accepting, noticing how he adjusted his grip to steady her properly, neither grasping too tight nor treating her as fragile. "I'll get a fire going," he said, already gathering deadfall from beneath the scattered cottonwoods that lined the creek. "You might want to stretch your legs a bit. Been a long ride." Kath walked to the creek's edge, listening to the water's gentle music. Behind her, she heard the soft sounds of Jack working, the snap of dry wood being broken to size, the strike of flint and steel, the rustle of supplies being unpacked from the cart. When she turned back, a small fire was already catching, its warm light pushing back the darkness. Jack had set a tin pot of beans to heat at the fire's edge and was unsaddling the mule. She watched as he gave the animal a thorough rub-down before letting it graze, his movements speaking of long practice and genuine care for the creature's comfort. The beans soon began to bubble, filling the air with their simple but appetizing aroma. To Kath's surprise, Jack served her first, handing her a tin plate with a generous portion. "Ain't fancy," he said, almost apologetically, "but they're hot and filling." "Thank you," she murmured, still thrown by his courtesy. In her experience, men usually served themselves first, leaving women to take what remained. She ate slowly, savoring both the meal and the peaceful quiet of their small camp. After the dishes were rinsed in the creek and dried, Jack surprised her again. He pulled his bedroll from the cart and spread it on the ground near the fire, then gestured to the cart bed. "You can sleep up there," he said. "It ain't much, but it's off the ground. I put some fresh hay down to soften it." Kath stared at him, then at the cart. He'd lined the bed with clean hay and laid out a second blanket. It was a far cry from her old feather bed at home, but the thoughtfulness of the gesture caught at her heart. The night grew deeper, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient dance. Coyotes began their evening chorus in the distance, their yipping calls echoing across the prairie. Kath climbed into the cart bed and arranged the blankets, then clasped her hands together. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her prayer barely audible above the creek's murmur. "Thank you for this day's mercies, unexpected as they've been. Please watch over us through the night." She paused, then added softly, "And thank you for sending someone kind." Sleep came easier than she'd expected, rocked by the gentle night breeze and warmed by wool blankets that smelled of cedar and wood smoke. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Jack's figure, sitting quiet and watchful by the fire. Dawn came with the first tentative notes of prairie larks. Kath woke to the smell of coffee and opened her eyes to find Jack already up and moving. A blackened coffee pot sat near the renewed fire, and the morning air was sharp with its rich aroma. "Morning," Jack said, pouring the dark liquid into a tin cup. He handed it to her as she climbed down from the cart, the coffee hot enough to warm her hands through the metal. "Hope you sleep all right." "I did, thank you." Kath sipped the coffee, finding it strong but good. Jack had already fed and harnessed the mule, and their small camp was mostly packed away. Efficiency born of long practice, she guessed, watching him work. They set out as the sun cleared the horizon, the mule's steady pace taking them gradually uphill. The prairie grass gave way to scattered pine trees, their shadows stretching across the trail. The air grew cooler and carried the scent of evergreen sap. As they climbed higher into the pine ridges, Jack began to speak, his voice matching the steady rhythm of the cart's wheels. "Cabins up in the high country," he said, gesturing toward the distant peaks. "Got good water year-round from a spring and the hunting's fair. Built it myself 4 years back." He described the cabin's location, tucked into a protected valley with southern exposure for the kitchen garden. There was pride in his voice when he spoke of the root cellar he'd dug, the smokehouse he'd built, the raspberry canes he'd transplanted from lower elevations. Kath listened, noting both what he said and what he didn't. This wasn't idle boasting, but a man laying out what he could offer: shelter, protection, a chance at a real home. Still, she held her doubts close. Experience had taught her that men's promises often fell short of reality. The sun climbed toward noon, and Jack stopped the cart in a small clearing. "Mule needs a rest," he said, helping Kath down. "Thought we might walk a spell, stretch our legs. Trail's easier from here to there." He pointed toward a ridge ahead. To Kath's surprise, he fell into step beside her as they walked, neither ahead nor behind. When the trail narrowed, he stepped aside to let her choose her path. When it widened again, he returned to walking at her shoulder, matching his stride to hers. It was this, more than anything, that unsettled her, and yet also warmed something deep inside. Here was a man who seemed to expect her to walk beside him as a partner, not follow in his wake like property. The realization brought a flush of pride to her cheeks, even as it challenged everything she'd come to expect from men. They walked in companionable silence, the pine needles soft beneath their feet. A jay scolded from a nearby branch, and a squirrel bounded across their path. The air was sweet, with sun-warmed pine sap, and a gentle breeze stirred the treetops far above. Kath found herself stealing glances at Jack as they walked. The morning light revealed new details, the way his shirt had been carefully mended, the precise way he placed his feet on the trail, the gentle expression in his eyes when he pointed out a deer's fresh tracks crossing their path. When they returned to the cart, Jack helped her up with the same quiet courtesy he'd shown since the auction. But now Kath felt something different in the air between them, a fragile trust beginning to take root, like the first green shoot breaking through spring soil. The mule plodded onward, taking them higher into the pine-clad ridges. Kath sat straighter on the wooden seat, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She didn't know what waited at the end of this journey, but for the first time since her parents' death, she felt something close to hope. Jack clicked softly to the mule, guiding it around a bend in the trail. The sun had passed its zenith, casting dappled shadows through the pine boughs. They still had far to go, but Kath was beginning to believe that sometimes the longest journeys could lead to the most unexpected blessings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines as Jack's mule cart wound its way up the final slope. Kath's muscles ached from the journey, but her attention fixed on the sight ahead. A sturdy log cabin nestled against the mountainside, its rough-hewn walls weathered to a silvery gray. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, dancing in the mountain breeze. "Home," Jack said simply, drawing the mule to a halt before the cabin's front door. Kath took in the details with careful eyes. A neat woodpile stood stacked against the north wall, protected by an overhang. A small garden plot, already showing signs of spring plantings, stretched toward the south. The cabin itself was larger than she'd expected, with 2 windows fitted with oiled paper to let in light. Jack helped her down from the cart, his hands steady as she stretched her stiff legs. The altitude made the air feel thin in her lungs, and she steadied herself against the cartwheel for a moment. "Take your time," Jack said. "Mountain air takes some getting used to." He unloaded their few supplies while Kath gathered herself, then moved to open the cabin door. "It ain't much," he said, a note of uncertainty in his voice that she hadn't heard before. "But it's warm and dry." Kath stepped inside, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dimmer light. The main room was neat enough, with a stone hearth along one wall and a plank table with 2 chairs. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a Dutch oven sat ready by the fire. But what made her stop short was the wooden cradle placed near the hearth, its rockers worn smooth with use. A small whimper rose from the cradle, followed by rustling movements. Jack moved past her quickly, his big hands suddenly gentle as he reached down. When he straightened, Kath's breath caught in her throat. In his arms was a baby girl no more than 6 months old, with dark hair and eyes that held a solemn wisdom beyond her months. Her skin was a warm brown, and her features spoke clearly of her Apache heritage. The child regarded Kath with quiet intensity, one small fist pressed against her mouth. "This here's Anna," Jack said softly, his voice rough with emotion, though her mother named her Annaba before she passed. He cradled the infant with practiced care, but Kath could see uncertainty in his eyes as he looked between them. "She's beautiful," Kath whispered, her heart already reaching out to the child. Jack swallowed hard. "She's Tom Wheeler's daughter, my best friend since we were boys. Her mother was White Mountain Apache, name of Morning Star. Tom met her while prospecting, fell hard in love." His voice grew heavier. "They married proper, built a life. But Tom got killed in a mining quarrel 4 months back." "Morning Star," he paused, pain crossing his features. "She died bringing Anna into the world." The baby stirred, making small, fussy sounds. Jack bounced her gently, but his movements held a hint of awkwardness. "Nobody in town would take her in." "Called her." He stopped, jaw tightening. "Well, don't matter what they called her. She's Tom's daughter, my friend's child, couldn't leave her to strangers who'd treat her wrong." Kath stepped closer, her hands moving instinctively toward the baby. "May I?" Jack carefully transferred Anna to her arms. The infant felt solid and warm, her weight settling naturally against Kath's chest. Without thinking, Kath began a gentle swaying motion, humming softly under her breath. Anna's dark eyes studied her face before the small features relaxed, tiny fingers curling around a fold of Kath's dress. "I've done my best," Jack said, watching them with visible relief. "But hunting takes me away sometimes, and the daily work. She needs more than I can give alone." His words held both admission and question. Kath understood then why he'd come to the auction, why he'd chosen her despite the crowd's mockery. He hadn't wanted just any wife, but someone who could help him care for this precious child that fate had placed in his keeping. "She's been fed?" Kath asked, noting the baby's drowsy contentment. Jack nodded. "Got a goat out back, good milker, been mixing it with corn mash like the Apache women showed me. She takes it well enough, but sometimes she cries in the night and I don't always know what she needs." Kath's fingers found a slightly damp spot on Anna's clothing. "She needs changing," she said with quiet confidence. "Do you have clean cloths?" Jack moved quickly to a chest near the wall, producing soft, worn cotton squares. Kath laid Anna on the table, her hands remembering the motions from years of helping with her neighbor's children. The baby watched her with curious eyes, kicking her feet as Kath cleaned and dressed her in fresh cloths. "There now," Kath murmured, lifting Anna back into her arms. "That's better, isn't it, little one?" The baby responded with a small smile that made Kath's heart turn over. Jack had been watching intently, his relief growing more evident. "You've worked with babies before?" "Many," Kath nodded. "Helped raise my sister's children before the fever took them, and minded for half the families in our settlement." Pain flickered in her chest at the memories, but Anna's warm weight against her shoulder eased it somewhat. The sun was setting now, painting the cabin's interior in soft golden light. Jack moved to the hearth, stirring the banked coals and adding fresh wood. "Best get supper started," he said. "Nothing fancy, just venison and cornbread. But there's plenty." Kath settled into one of the chairs, Anna drowsing against her chest. She watched as Jack moved around the cabin with careful efficiency, slicing venison and mixing cornbread batter. The domestic sight touched something deep inside her. This strong, scarred mountain man so gentle in his tasks, stealing glances at them as if hardly daring to believe they were real. The meal was simple but filling. They ate quietly, the baby sleeping peacefully on a quilt spread between them on the floor. Jack had built up the fire, and its warmth filled the cabin with drowsy comfort. Through the window, Kath could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "There's a proper bed through there," Jack said finally, gesturing to a doorway covered by a blanket. "For you and Anna. I'll sleep out here by the fire." Kath nodded, too full of emotions to speak. She gathered the sleeping infant gently in her arms and carried her to the small bedroom. A rope bed with a straw tick mattress stood against one wall, piled with clean blankets. A rough-made dresser held folded clothing. She recognized some as baby things, clearly purchased or traded for with careful thought. She laid Anna in the cradle that Jack had moved into the room, tucking the blankets around her small form. The baby sighed in her sleep, one tiny hand flung above her head. Kath found herself blinking back tears as she watched the peaceful face. When she finally lay down on her own bed, sleep was slow in coming. The day's revelations swirled in her mind. The lonely man at the auction, the orphaned child, the weight of trust already placed in her hands. She could hear Jack moving quietly in the other room, banking the fire for the night. The strange cabin didn't feel quite so strange anymore, with Anna's soft breathing nearby and the knowledge of Jack's protective presence beyond the door. Her last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude, wondering at the mysterious ways God worked to bring healing to broken hearts. As she drifted off, she knew with quiet certainty that her life had indeed changed forever, and perhaps, just perhaps, it had changed for the better. Dawn light filtered through the cabin's small windows, casting long shadows across the plank floor. Kath rose early, her body already adjusting to the mountain rhythms. Baby Anna stirred in her cradle, making soft morning sounds that brought a smile to Kath's face. The cabin's main room showed signs of a bachelor's care, functional but lacking the touches that made a home truly comfortable. Dust had settled in corners, and ashes from many fires lay thick in the hearth. A broken chair leaned against one wall, its seat in need of repair. Kath tied an apron over her dress and set to work. She found a broom in the corner and began sweeping, starting with the hearth. Each stroke stirred up clouds of gray ash, but she persisted, working methodically until the stones gleamed. The sound drew Jack from where he'd been tending the stock outside. He paused in the doorway, watching as she worked. "You don't have to," he began, but stopped when she shook her head. "A clean hearth makes better bread," she said simply, continuing her sweeping. "And less dust means a healthier baby." The broken chair caught her eye next. She examined it closely, fingers tracing the loose joints. "Do you have any wood glue? Or strong twine?" Jack rummaged in a tool chest and brought her both. Kath settled on the floor, the chair laid carefully across her lap. Her strong hands worked surely, applying glue and wrapping twine to reinforce the weak spots. Years of maintaining her own household had taught her these skills well. "Didn't expect you'd know about mending furniture," Jack said, watching her work with evident surprise. Kath tied off the last bit of twine. "Had to learn after our parents passed there wasn't money for new things. You either fixed what you had or did without." She set the chair upright, testing its stability. "This should hold now." She moved to the cook stove next, building up the fire and setting a pot of water to boil. From Jack's stores, she measured out oats for porridge, adding a pinch of salt. The familiar motions settled her, gave her purpose. Anna began to fuss, and Jack lifted her from the cradle. He changed her diaper with careful movements, then brought her to the table where Kath was stirring the porridge. The baby watched the steam rise, her dark eyes wide with interest. "Would she take a taste?" Kath asked, testing a spoonful for temperature. "It's cool enough now." Jack nodded, and Kath offered Anna a tiny bit of the porridge. The baby's face scrunched in surprise at the new texture, then her features lit up. A small laugh bubbled from her throat, soft and musical. The sound stopped both adults in their tracks. Jack's face broke into a broad smile. "First time I've heard her really laugh," he said softly. Warmth spread through Kath's chest as Anna reached for another taste, still making happy, gurgling sounds. "This," she thought, "this is what a home should feel like." After breakfast, Jack suggested showing her the property. "Need you to know the lay of the land," he said, settling Anna into a sling across Kath's chest. The baby snuggled close, content after her meal. They walked first to the spring that bubbled up from the ground near the cabin. The water ran crystal clear and ice cold, even in the warming day. A careful stone catchment directed some of the flow into a wooden trough for the stock, while the main stream continued down the slope. "This spring's the real treasure," Jack said, his voice growing serious. "Never runs dry, even in drought years. That's caught some notice we could do without." He led her past the small corral where his mule dozed in the sun, showing her the rough fence line he'd built. Tall pines marked the edge of his claim, their branches swaying in the mountain breeze. But as they walked, his shoulders grew tense. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her. "There's something you need to know," he said heavily. "Deputy Walt Grayson's been sniffing around these parts for months. Him and rancher Silas Crowell. They've got their eyes on this spring. Crowell's got cattle to water, and this would save him driving them miles to the river." Kath shifted Anna in her sling, considering his words. What can they do? "Legally? Nothing. I've got proper claim papers, but he scuffed the ground with his boot. Law gets twisted sometimes, especially when there's money behind it. And with Anna being half Apache," his voice trailed off, the worry clear in his face. "That's why you needed someone else here," Kath said slowly. "Not just for help with Anna." Jack nodded. "A man alone, they figure they can pressure him, wear him down. But a family on the land, that's harder to move." He met her eyes directly. "I know it's asking a lot. Putting you in the middle of this." "You were honest in your need," Kath replied. "That's more than most men would be." They completed their circuit of the property, Jack pointing out the best spots for a kitchen garden, where the wild berries grew thickest, the game trails he hunted. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was sliding toward afternoon. Kath prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, with dried apples she'd found in Jack's stores. As they ate by lamplight, the mountain darkness pressed close against the windows. In the distance, wolves began to howl, their voices rising and falling in wild harmony. Anna, drowsy in Kath's arms, stirred at the sound. Kath found herself holding the baby closer, suddenly very aware of how isolated they were, and how vulnerable. Yet strangely, She felt more right here than she had anywhere since her family's death. Here was purpose, here was need, here was the chance to build something meaningful. "You've got grit, Kath," Jack said quietly, watching her across the table. "Not many would face this life. Taking on a stranger's child, living this far from town, knowing the troubles we might face." The sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. She ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise, yet pleased by it too. "Someone needs to stand for what's right," she said softly, "and Anna deserves a real home." The baby had fallen asleep against her chest, one small hand curled trustingly in Kath's shirtwaist. Jack's eyes softened as he looked at them both. The lamplight cast a gentle glow over the scene. The sleeping child, the strong woman who held her, the man who had brought them together. Outside, the wolves sang their ancient songs to the stars, but inside the cabin, something new and precious was taking root. The mountain morning dawned crisp and clear 2 days later. Kath stood in the cabin doorway, watching Jack hitch the mule to the cart. Anna dozed against her shoulder, wrapped snugly in a soft blanket. The thought of going to town made Kath's stomach twist, but she squared her shoulders. She had faced worse than whispers before. "You don't have to come," Jack said, adjusting the harness straps. "Could manage the trading myself." Kath shook her head firmly. "Best to face them straight on. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I reckon you could use help getting fair prices. Men don't always know the true worth of household goods." Jack looked at her thoughtfully, then nodded. "Reckon you're right about that." They loaded the cart carefully, empty flour sacks to refill, a crate of eggs Kath had gathered, and 3 fresh-baked pies she'd made from dried apples. The morning sun climbed higher as they started down the mountain trail, the cart creaking over every bump and rut. The journey took most of the morning. Kath held Anna close, singing softly to keep the baby content through the jolting ride. Jack drove steadily, occasionally pointing out landmarks, a lightning-struck pine, a distinctive boulder, places where deer often crossed. As they approached town, Kath felt her spine stiffen. The streets were busy with Sunday traffic, wagons heading to church, families walking in their best clothes. Heads turned as Jack's cart rolled past. Kath heard the whispers start immediately. "That's the fat one from the auction. Living up there with that mountain manna and that Indian brat." Kath lifted her chin higher, though her cheeks burned. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her shame. Jack's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward, guiding the mule toward the mercantile. The store bell jangled as they entered. The clerk, Mr. Peterson, barely glanced up from his ledger. "Back corner for Indians and their kind," he drawled. "We'll shop where we please," Jack said quietly. His hand rested near his belt knife, not a threat, but a reminder. Kath moved purposefully through the store, selecting what they needed. Flour, coffee, nails for repairs, lamp oil. When she reached for sugar, she heard a woman's sharp laugh. "Sweet tooth to match her size, I see." Kath turned slowly, meeting the woman's eyes. "Sugar preserves fruit," she said calmly. "Makes winter provisions last longer." She picked up the bag, examining it carefully. "Though this seems dear for second-grade sugar. I saw the better prices in Denver last month." Mr. Peterson's head snapped up. "This here's pure cane sugar, finest quality." "The color's off," Kath interrupted. "And there's moisture damage on the sack. I'll give you half price, or we'll wait till the next shipment comes in." A tense silence followed. Mr. Peterson spluttered, but Kath held his gaze steadily. Finally, he nodded grudgingly. "Half price then, but only for that sack." Jack's mouth twitched, almost a smile. As they loaded their purchases, Kath heard mutters of surprise from other customers. She pretended not to notice, but satisfaction warmed her chest. The church bell began tolling as they finished loading the cart. Kath hesitated, then touched Jack's arm. "We should go in," she said softly. "Anna needs the blessing, proper-like." Jack studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. They walked together toward the white-painted church, Kath carrying Anna. The baby was awake now, dark eyes bright with curiosity. The whispers started as soon as they entered. Kath felt the stares like physical things, burning against her skin. They found seats in the back pew. but the murmurs followed them. Shameful bringing that child here. Probably not even properly married. Size of her, Lord have mercy. A woman in an elaborate bonnet turned to stare openly. Some people have no sense of propriety, she announced loudly. That half-breed baby has no place in God's house. Kath's hands trembled. She started to rise, ready to flee, but Jack's voice rang out clear and strong. "Suffer the little children to come unto me," he quoted, standing tall, "and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God." His scarred face was stern as he surveyed the congregation. Mark chapter 10, verse 14. Or have you forgotten the word while you're busy judging his children? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the pastor, halfway through arranging his papers, stopped to stare. Jack remained standing, one hand resting protectively on Kath's shoulder. "Love thy neighbor as thyself," he continued quietly. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." Simple words, clear meaning. His eyes swept the church. Any other scripture need quoting today? Slowly, heads turned forward again. The pastor cleared his throat and began the service. Kath remained in her seat, heart pounding, aware of Jack's solid presence beside her. Anna reached up to pat her cheek, as if offering comfort. After the service, they set up their goods at the church's weekly bake sale. Kath arranged her pies carefully on the table, trying to ignore the way some women pulled their children away as they passed. But gradually, the aroma of fresh-baked apples and cinnamon drew people closer. "These look well made," one older woman said cautiously, examining a pie's latticed crust. "My mother's recipe," Kath replied. "She won prizes at the county fair." The woman nodded slowly. "I'll take one," she decided. "My John's partial to apple pie." Others followed, though some still passed by with sharp glances and lifted chins. Kath kept her face calm, accepting both coin and criticism with equal grace. She noticed Jack watching her with something like pride in his eyes. The sun was low when they finally started home. They made camp halfway up the mountain, in a sheltered hollow Jack knew well. He built a small fire while Kath fed and changed Anna. Neither spoke much as they ate their simple supper of beans and cornbread. The day's tension still hung in the air, but underneath was a sense of something achieved. They had stood their ground together, faced the town's judgment, and remained unbowed. Anna slept peacefully in her blanket nest, one tiny hand curled around Kath's finger. The firelight cast soft shadows as night settled over their camp. Tomorrow they would reach home, their odd little family in their cabin on the mountain. But tonight, under the vast stretch of stars, they rested in the quiet knowledge that they had chosen their path and would walk it with dignity, whatever came. The morning sun crept over the mountain peaks as Jack's mule cart finally climbed the last stretch of trail to their cabin. Kath held baby Anna close, sheltering her from the crisp dawn air. The little one had slept most of the way, but now stirred and cooed against Kath's chest. Their return felt different somehow, like coming home rather than arriving at a stranger's dwelling. Jack guided the tired mule into the corral while Kath carried Anna inside. The cabin's familiar scent of pine logs and wood smoke welcomed them. Kath laid the baby in her cradle, then reached for her apron with purpose. "You both must be hungry after that long ride," she said, pulling out the heavy cast-iron skillet. "I reckon some flapjacks would set us right." Jack paused in the doorway, watching as she efficiently gathered ingredients. Her broad shoulders moved with certainty as she mixed flour, eggs, and the precious sugar they'd bargained for in town. The griddle sizzled as she poured perfect circles of batter. "Never seen flapjacks that even before," Jack commented. His usual gruff tone softened with what might have been admiration. Kath felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "My ma taught me the trick. Use the back of the ladle to spread the batter just so." She flipped a golden brown cake with practiced ease. "There's coffee ready too, if you've a mind." They ate in comfortable silence, the baby watching them with bright eyes from her cradle. Jack cleaned his plate twice, and Kath noticed how he savored each bite. When was the last time someone had cooked him a proper meal? After breakfast, Kath surveyed the cabin's storage shelves with a critical eye. "These need a good sorting," she declared. "Can't properly plan for harvest supper with everything helter-skelter." She began emptying the shelves, organizing provisions, and wiping away dust. Jack shouldered his axe. Got wood to split, he said, but lingered a moment, watching her work. Something in his expression had softened since their return from town. The morning passed in steady labor. Through the open door, Kath heard the rhythmic thunk of Jack's axe while she cleaned and arranged. Anna napped contentedly, waking only for feeding and changing. When she fussed, Kath hummed the hymns they'd heard at church, and the baby settled easily. By midday, the shelves gleamed with order. Kath had discovered more supplies than she'd expected. Dried beans, cornmeal, even some preserved fruit. She was already planning pies for the harvest supper, determined to show the townspeople what she could do. Jack came in, shirt dark with sweat from wood splitting. He nodded at the transformed shelves. Place ain't looked this proper since. He trailed off, then headed outside again. Kath followed him out to help mend a broken fence rail. The sun rode high as they worked together, passing tools back and forth without need for words. Kath's strong hands managed the heavy posts easily, earning another approving glance from Jack. When Anna's crying called them inside, Kath went to tend her while Jack finished the fence. The baby had grown familiar with Kath's touch, turning to her naturally for comfort. Sometimes Kath caught herself wondering if this was what having her own child might feel like. As evening approached, Kath began preparing bread dough for the next day's baking. The familiar motions of measuring and mixing soothed her spirit. She was surprised when Jack appeared beside her at the table. "Show me?" he asked simply, gesturing at the dough. Kath blinked in surprise but recovered quickly. "Here," she said, dusting his large hands with flour. "Like this." She demonstrated the kneading motion, then watched as he attempted to copy her. His fingers were clumsy in the dough, pressing too hard. Kath couldn't help but laugh softly at his furrowed concentration. The sound startled them both. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed freely. Jack's eyes crinkled slightly. "Reckon I'll stick to hunting," he said, but continued working the dough alongside her. After supper, they sat before the fire while Anna slept peacefully in her cradle. The flames had burned low, casting a gentle glow across the cabin's walls. Outside, a lone coyote called into the darkness. "Never thought I'd have a home again," Jack said suddenly, his voice quiet. "Spent 20 years in these mountains, hunting, trapping, guiding when I had to." He stared into the fire. Lost good friends to the winters. Johnson to an avalanche. Mackenzie to a grizzly. Kath listened, her hands still in her lap. This was the most Jack had ever spoken at once. "The loneliness," and he continued, "it eats at a man up here. Was near ready to leave these hills before." He glanced at the sleeping baby. "Before Tom brought her mother here, sick with fever. Promised him I'd care for his child." He fell silent, and Kath found herself sharing in return. "My folks took sick 3 winters ago," she said softly. "Pa first, then Ma trying to nurse him. My sisters scattered after. Lucy to California, Mary to Kansas City. Felt like the world had broken apart." The fire popped and sparked. Anna stirred, whimpering in her sleep. Kath rose automatically to rock the cradle, her touch gentle on the baby's back. Jack watched them, his scarred face thoughtful in the firelight. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, of wounds slowly healing. They were no longer just 2 strangers thrown together by circumstance, but something more. "You've got away with her," Jack said finally. "She knows she's safe with you." Kath blushed, continuing to rock the cradle slowly. "She's a precious soul," she replied. "No matter what some folks say." The night deepened around the cabin, stars wheeling above the pine forest. When they finally parted for sleep, Jack to his bedroll by the fire, Kath to the small bedroom, there was a new ease between them. Not quite family yet, but no longer alone. The warmth of belonging so long absent from both their lives had begun to take root in this mountain home. Golden afternoon light spilled through the church hall windows as wagons and carts rolled into town for the autumn harvest supper. The October air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Inside the hall, long tables groaned under the weight of steaming dishes and fresh-baked goods brought by families from miles around. Kath's hands trembled slightly as she straightened her best dress, a sturdy brown wool she'd carefully pressed that morning. Jack had hitched up the mule cart before dawn, giving them time to prepare their offerings. 3 of Kath's carefully crafted pies and a haunch of venison he'd smoked himself. Baby Anna, dressed in a clean white gown Kath had sewn from flour sacks, dozed peacefully in her arms. "Ready?" Jack asked quietly, holding their loaded baskets. His usually wild beard had been trimmed, and he wore a clean shirt beneath his old buckskin jacket. Kath nodded, squaring her shoulders, as I'll ever be. They walked through the church hall doors together. The busy chatter dimmed as heads turned their way. Kath felt the familiar weight of stares, some curious, others still hostile. She focused on walking steady, chin held high like Jack had taught her. Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, bustled forward with a practiced smile. "Welcome. You can set those right here." She gestured to an empty spot on the dessert table, carefully avoiding looking directly at Anna. Kath arranged her pies with precision: apple with a lattice top, peach with a buttery crumb crust, and her special berry pie made from the last of summer's wild blackberries. The rich aroma drew appreciative sniffs from nearby women, though they quickly looked away when Kath glanced up. Jack set the venison among the other meat dishes, then returned to stand protectively near Kath and the baby. More families filed in, filling the hall with the shuffle of boots and rustle of Sunday clothes. Children darted between adults, eyeing the sweets table eagerly. Reverend Peterson called for silence, offering thanks for the harvest bounty. As his prayer ended, Anna stirred and opened her eyes. Kath swayed gently, humming under her breath to keep the baby calm amid the noise and unfamiliar faces. The feast began with a controlled chaos of plates being filled and benches scraping across wooden floors. Kath noticed several people pointedly avoiding their corner of the room. She busied herself cutting small bites of tender venison for Anna, who had recently started accepting soft foods. "Those your pies, Mrs. Boone?" A weathered older woman approached their table, peering at the desserts through wire-rimmed spectacles. Kath started at being addressed as Mrs. Boone but recovered quickly. "Yes, ma'am. Made fresh this morning." The woman, Kath recognized her as Widow Matthews from the general store, cut a slim slice of the apple pie and took a careful bite. Her eyebrows rose. "Well now, that's proper baking." The widow's approval seemed to break some invisible barrier. Others drifted over to sample Kath's pies, and soon appreciative murmurs spread through the hall. "Perfectly spiced," someone commented. "Crust light as a feather," said another. Anna chose that moment to let out a peal of laughter, clear as a bell, reaching for a bright ribbon on a passing girl's dress. The sound carried across the room, drawing surprised looks. Several women paused, their expressions softening at the sight of the baby's innocent joy. Mrs. Peterson approached slowly, studying Anna's bright eyes and dimpled smile. "She seems quite healthy," she offered hesitantly. "Strong as a mountain flower," Kath replied firmly but kindly. "Would you like to hold her?" The minister's wife looked startled but didn't refuse when Kath carefully transferred Anna to her arms. The baby immediately reached for Mrs. Peterson's brooch, burbling happily. "Oh," Mrs. Peterson's stern features relaxed into a genuine smile. "She's not at all that is, she's quite charming." More women gathered around, their initial reluctance melting as Anna demonstrated her newfound skill at waving goodbye. Kath heard whispers of "sweet child" and "dear little thing," replacing the usual harsh comments about half-breeds. Jack, who had been quietly observing from nearby, suddenly straightened to his full height. The hall grew hushed as he cleared his throat. "Folks," he began, his deep voice carrying clearly, "I want to say something." He moved to stand beside Kath, who felt her heart quicken at his serious expression. "Some of you know me as a loner, a man who keeps to himself in the high country. Truth is, I was lost up there, until Providence sent me what I needed most." He turned to face Kath directly, taking her work-roughened hand in his larger one. "This here is the strongest woman I know," he declared, his eyes holding hers. "Takes real courage to face a strange place, strange people, and choose to give love instead of bitterness. Kath Mayfield has that courage in spades." Gasps and whispers rippled through the gathered crowd. Kath felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she stood tall, her fingers tightening around Jack's calloused hand. For the first time since arriving in this community, she felt truly seen. Not as the fat one, or an object of pity, but as herself. "Well said, Boone," Widow Matthews called out, breaking the tension. "And she makes a fine pie besides." Scattered laughter and nods followed. Mrs. Peterson returned Anna to Kath's arms, patting her shoulder with surprising warmth. "You must share your crust recipe with our Ladies' Aid Society," she said. "We meet Wednesdays after service." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small conversations and cautious smiles. Several farmers' wives asked Kath about her preserving methods. The blacksmith's daughter shyly offered to hold Anna while Kath ate. Even the deputy, who had so often eyed their land with suspicion, tipped his hat respectfully as he passed their table. As the feast wound down, lanterns were extinguished one by one. Families gathered their empty dishes and sleepy children, heading out into the crystal-clear night. Jack helped Kath wrap their remaining food in clean cloths while Anna dozed in her wrap. The walk to their cart felt different from their arrival. Instead of hostile silence, they received quiet good evenings and safe travels from departing neighbors. Kath's heart felt as bright as the stars overhead, though she couldn't quite find words for the change. Jack helped her up onto the wagon seat, then carefully arranged a warm blanket around her and Anna before climbing up himself. The mule's hooves clip-clopped steadily as they started the long journey home. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the creaking wagon wheels and the soft whisper of pine boughs overhead. Jack's shoulder occasionally brushed against Kath's as he guided the mule around rough spots in the trail. At one point, his hand found hers again in the darkness, strong fingers intertwining with quiet certainty. Neither spoke of it, but Kath felt the gesture echo through her entire being. This connection between them had grown as naturally as autumn colors in the aspens, gradual but undeniable. The moon rose high and bright, illuminating their path through the mountains. Anna slept peacefully against Kath's chest, her small warmth a reminder of all that had changed since that dusty afternoon in the auction yard. What had started as desperate chance, a scarred mountain man and an unwanted woman, had somehow grown into something precious and real. The road home stretched long before them, winding up into their beloved highlands. But Kath found she didn't mind the journey, not with Jack's solid presence beside her, and their little family together under the vast Colorado sky. The autumn night wrapped around the cabin like a thick blanket, broken only by the gentle pop of dying embers in the hearth. Kath had just settled Anna in her cradle, the baby's dark lashes fluttering against her cheeks as she dreamed. Jack sat at the rough-hewn table cleaning his rifle by lamplight. The peaceful domesticity of the scene made Kath's heart ache with contentment. A sudden thunder of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Jack was on his feet in an instant, rifle at ready. Kath instinctively moved to stand between the cradle and the door. "Boone, open up!" Deputy Walt Grayson's voice cut through the night air like a knife. Jack exchanged a quick glance with Kath before unbarring the door. The deputy stood on the porch, flanked by two hard-faced men Kath didn't recognize. Moonlight glinted off Grayson's badge and the papers he thrust forward. "Got some business here," Grayson announced, his thin lips twisted in what might have been satisfaction. "Federal Indian Affairs order. The half-breed child is to be removed at first light and transported to the agency orphanage." The words hit Kath like a physical blow. She stumbled back toward Anna's cradle, gathering the sleeping child into her arms. "No," she whispered. "You can't." "Can and will," Grayson replied, tapping the papers. "Signed by the agent himself. These men are here to ensure the transfer happens peaceful-like." His gaze slid to Jack's rifle. Though some folks might need reminding about the consequences of resisting federal authority, Jack's scarred face had gone rigid with fury. His knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. "That baby ain't going nowhere," he growled. "Her pa was my friend. He trusted me to care for her." "Your friend," Grayson sneered, "had no right making promises about an Indian child. Law is clear. She belongs under agency supervision." Kath felt Anna stir against her shoulder, making small sounds of distress. The baby seemed to sense the tension filling the cabin. Looking at her innocent face, Kath's throat tightened with fear and grief. "Please," she said, forcing herself to meet Grayson's cold eyes. "She's thriving here. We love her. She needs a family, not an orphanage." The deputy's laugh held no warmth. "Family? That's rich coming from you." The fat one nobody wanted, playing at being a mother to a half-breed? He shook his head. Dawn tomorrow. Have her ready. One of his companions spat tobacco juice onto the cabin floor. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, mountain man. Ain't worth dying over. Jack took a menacing step forward, but Kath caught his arm. Jack, no, she pleaded quietly. Violence would only make things worse, giving them the excuse they needed to take Anna immediately. Or worse. Smart woman, Grayson commented. Maybe you ain't as stupid as you look. He tipped his hat mockingly. Sunrise, folks. Don't try running. We got men watching the trails. The three riders wheeled their horses around and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of hoofbeats and the damning papers on the table. Jack slammed his fist against the wall, making the tin plates rattle. I'll kill them, he snarled. Try to take our girl. I'll put them all on the ground. And then what? Kath demanded, though her voice shook. They'll hang you for murder. Anna will still end up in that orphanage. Is that what you want? He began pacing the cabin like a caged wolf, rifle still clutched in his hands. Can't let them take her. Can't. The raw anguish in his voice matched the pain in Kath's own heart. Anna began to cry in earnest now, perhaps sensing their distress. Kath sank into the rocking chair, tears rolling down her cheeks as she tried to soothe the baby. Hush, little one, she whispered. Hush now. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Jack continued his restless pacing, occasionally stepping outside to scan the darkness for watchers. Kath rocked Anna, memorizing every detail of her precious face, the way her dark hair curled at her temples, the tiny dimple in her right cheek when she smiled. Near midnight, Jack finally slumped onto a stool by the hearth. What do we do, Kath? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I can't just hand her over. Kath reached out and gripped his calloused hand. I'm scared too, she admitted. But if we fight them with guns, we'll lose everything. There has to be another way. They sat in silence as the fire burned lower, both lost in thought. Anna slept fitfully between them, one tiny hand curled around Kath's finger. The thought of never seeing that small gesture again made Kath's chest constrict with pain. Lord, she whispered, her prayer barely audible. Please don't let them take her. Show us a way. She's just an innocent baby. Please. Jack squeezed her hand harder. I won't let them take her, he said with quiet intensity. Whatever comes, we face it together. The night seemed endless, yet somehow too short. They took turns holding Anna, neither willing to put her in her cradle. Each precious moment felt like sand slipping through their fingers. Kath told her stories, sang every lullaby she knew, tried to pour a lifetime of love into these last hours. Around 3 a.m, Anna woke hungry. Kath prepared her potato mash with shaking hands, each spoonful a reminder of all the meals she would never feed their girl again. Jack watched them with haunted eyes, his usual stoic expression cracked wide open with grief. The eastern sky began to lighten, turning from black to deep purple. Soon the sun would rise, bringing with it the deputy and his men. Kath's heart pounded so hard she felt sick. Jack stood at the window, rifle ready, though they both knew using it would only make things worse. She was just starting to say Mama, Kath whispered, more to herself than Jack. The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. Dawn crept closer, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. Any other morning, it would have been beautiful. Now each brightening moment felt like a knife twisting in Kath's heart. Anna stirred in her arms, blinking sleepily at the growing light. Jack moved to stand beside them, one hand gentle on Anna's dark hair, the other still gripping his rifle. We're her family, he said roughly. Only family she's got. They can't just. But they could. The papers on the table proved it. The law that should protect children was being used to tear their little family apart. Kath had never felt so helpless, not even at the auction where men had laughed at her size and called her worthless. Now watching the sun rise over the mountains they called home, Kath and Jack stood together, united in fear and determination. Anna snuggled closer, unaware that these might be her last moments with the only parents she had ever known. Hoofbeats would come soon. The deputy would return with his men and his papers, ready to rip their hearts out. But for these few precious minutes, they were still a family, holding on to each other in the golden light of dawn. They waited, every sense straining for the sound of approaching riders. Jack's hand found Kath's again, their fingers intertwining with desperate strength. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun cleared the eastern ridge, sending its first rays through the cabin windows. Anna reached for the light, giggling, while Kath and Jack held their breath, counting the moments until they heard the dreaded sound of horses approaching their mountain home. The morning sun rose harsh and unforgiving over the mountain cabin. Kath held Anna close, breathing in her sweet baby scent one last time. The sound of approaching hooves made her stomach clench with dread. Deputy Grayson led his men into the yard, dust rising beneath their horses' hooves. His face showed no mercy as he dismounted and strode toward the cabin door. "Time's up," he announced, pushing inside without knocking. Kath's arms tightened around Anna instinctively. The baby, sensing her fear, began to whimper. "Please," Kath whispered, though she knew begging would do no good. "Please don't do this." "Hand her over," Grayson ordered, reaching for the child. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Jack's whole body tensed like a drawn bowstring. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and Kath could see the fury building in his eyes. Before he could move, she caught his gaze, silently pleading. "Jack, no," she said softly. "Violence won't help her." The deputy's men flanked him, hands resting on their gun belts. One stepped forward to take Anna from Kath's arms. The baby began to wail, her small hands reaching back toward the only mother she'd known. "Hush now, little one," Kath crooned through her tears, though her heart was shattering. "Be brave." Jack made a sudden move forward, but Kath grabbed his arm. "Please," she begged, "we have to have faith. We'll find another way." The deputy smirked as his man carried the screaming child to the waiting cart. "Wise choice, mountain man. Hate to have to shoot you in front of your woman." They watched helplessly as Anna was settled into the cart. Her cries grew fainter as the wheels began to turn, carrying her away down the mountain trail. The sound of her distress echoed in Kath's ears long after it faded into silence. When the last horse disappeared around the bend, Jack let out a roar of rage and slammed his fist into the cabin wall. The impact shook the whole structure, sending cups rattling on their shelf. "I'll kill them!" he snarled, already reaching for his rifle. "I'll storm that jail and take her back." "And then what?" Kath demanded, though her voice trembled. "They'll hang you for murder, and Anna will still be lost to us forever." Jack paced like a caged animal, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "I can't just do nothing. That baby needs us." Kath sank into her rocking chair, the same one where she'd spent so many nights holding Anna. Her heart felt hollow, but something stirred in her memory. Her mother's voice, soft and sure, reciting scripture during hard times. "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." The verse sparked something in her mind, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. She sat up straighter, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Jack," she said firmly, "there must be another way. Not with guns, but with the law itself." He turned to her, skepticism written across his scarred face. "The law? The law's what took her." "Bad men twisting the law took her," Kath corrected. "But what if we could fight back with truth instead of bullets?" She stood up, moving with sudden purpose toward the old trunk in the corner. It had been her parents', brought with her from the auction out of sentiment. Inside lay papers and memories she hadn't looked at in years. "What are you doing?" Jack asked, watching as she began pulling out yellowed documents. "My father was careful with papers," Kath explained, sorting through the stack. "He believed in doing things proper and legal. And I remember him talking about water rights in these mountains." Jack's expression changed from confusion to interest. "Water rights?" "That spring by the cabin," Kath said, still searching. "The one the deputy and his rancher friend want so badly. What if we could prove it's already claimed?" Hour after hour they combed through the documents, old letters, land deeds, birth certificates. Fragments of Kath's family history spread across the cabin floor. The sun climbed high, then began to sink, casting long shadows through the windows. Jack saddled the mule, ready to ride into town at a moment's notice. He brought Kath water and cold biscuits, but neither could eat. The silence where Anna's laughter should have been weighed too heavily on their hearts. As dusk approached, Kath's hands began to shake with fatigue. But then, at the bottom of the trunk, she found it. a weathered deed with her father's bold signature across the bottom. "Jack," she called out, her voice trembling with excitement, "look at this." He knelt beside her as she smoothed the paper flat. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. Her father had purchased the water rights to the spring that fed Jack's cabin, along with several others in the area. "Your pa owned these rights?" Jack asked in disbelief. "And never sold them," Kath confirmed, scanning the document. "When he died, they passed to me and my sisters. I'm the only one left in these parts, which means that spring is yours by law," Jack finished, a slow smile spreading across his face. "The deputy's rancher friend can't touch it." Kath clutched the deed to her chest, hope blazing in her heart. "This is our weapon, Jack. Not guns, truth." Without another word, Jack began gathering what they needed for the ride to town. He lit the old brass lantern while Kath carefully stored the deed in her father's leather document case. The precious paper might be their only chance to save Anna. Night was falling as they hitched the mule to the cart. Stars began to appear overhead, and a coyote called in the distance. The mountain air grew sharp with cold, but Kath barely noticed. Her mind was fixed on Anna, alone, and frightened in some strange place. "We're coming, little one," she whispered to the darkness. "Hold on." Jack helped her into the cart, then took up the reins. The lantern swung from its hook, casting circles of light on the rutted trail ahead. They had a long night's ride ahead of them, but neither spoke of rest. Their weapon was truth, carried in Kath's steady hands. Not lead and gunpowder, but ink and paper. Proof that what the deputy sought to steal was already legally claimed. The same law he had used to take Anna might now be turned against him. The cart creaked into motion, carrying them down the mountain toward town. Kath held the document case tight against her chest, feeling the weight of their hopes inside it. The deed that proved her father's foresight might be the key to bringing their baby home. Jack urged the mule to a steady pace, the lantern light bobbing ahead of them. Though the night was dark and the path treacherous, they pressed on. Every moment that passed was another moment Anna spent away from their love. They rode in determined silence, each lost in prayer and planning. The moon rose over the mountain peaks, painting the trail in silver. Somewhere ahead lay the town, the jail, and their stolen child. But now they carried with them a weapon more powerful than any gun, the truth that could set things right. The town's main street lay quiet under a blanket of stars as Jack and Kath's cart rolled in just before midnight. Most windows were dark, but the jailhouse lantern cast a yellow glow across the dusty road. Their mules' hooves echoed against the wooden sidewalks, drawing a few curious faces to peer through curtained windows. Kath clutched the leather document case to her chest, its weight grounding her. Her legs trembled as Jack helped her down from the cart, but her voice stayed steady. "We have to get Anna back tonight." Jack nodded, his scarred face grim in the lamplight. Together they climbed the jailhouse steps, boards creaking beneath their feet. Inside, Deputy Walt Grayson sat with his boots propped on his desk, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Well, he drawled, not bothering to stand. "The mountain man and his woman come calling at midnight. Ain't that something?" "Where is she?" Kath demanded, stepping forward. "Where's our baby?" The deputy's lazy smile didn't reach his eyes. "That half-breed child? Safe and sound at the agency orphanage, where she belongs by law." "No." Kath's voice rang out clear and strong. She pulled the deed from its case, holding it like a shield. "You want Jack's spring for your rancher friend, but that water's been legally claimed for decades, by my father." Deputy Grayson's boots hit the floor with a thud. He stood looming over the desk. "What nonsense are you talking?" The commotion had drawn attention. Through the windows, Kath could see people gathering outside, pressing close to listen. A few braver souls slipped inside the jailhouse, hanging back against the walls. Jack stepped forward, his presence filling the room. Though he carried no weapon, his bearing made the deputy take a step back. "Show him the paper, Kath." She spread the deed on the deputy's desk, smoothing its weathered surface. "Filed and witnessed in 1853, my father purchased the water rights to 5 springs in the Upper Valley, including the one by Jack's cabin. The same spring you've been trying to steal." "That's ridiculous," Grayson sputtered, but his eyes darted nervously to the growing crowd. "Some old paper don't change nothing. That child dash." "That child," Kath cut in, "belongs with us. You only took her to pressure Jack off his land. But the water was never yours to claim." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Someone in the back called out, "Get the judge." At midnight? The deputy's face flushed red. "Judge Morrison won't—" "Oh yes, I will." A deep voice came from the doorway. Judge Morrison stood there in his nightshirt and coat, gray hair mussed from sleep. "When half the town comes knocking about water rights and a stolen child, I most certainly will." The crowd parted to let him through. Though his eyes were heavy with interrupted sleep, they sharpened when they fell on the deed. "Your Honor," Kath said, forcing her voice to stay calm, "my father was Jerome Mayfield. He filed this deed 25 years ago, claiming water rights that were never sold or transferred. As his only heir remaining in the territory, those rights are legally mine." The judge adjusted his spectacles, bending close to study the document. The room held its breath. Even the deputy stood silent, watching as Morrison's finger traced the careful lines of text. "The filing looks proper," he muttered. "Witnessed by, yes, I remember Jerome Mayfield. Honest man, careful with his paperwork." He straightened up, looking at Kath with new respect. "This changes things considerably." "It changes nothing," Deputy Grayson protested. "The agency ordered that Indian child removed." "Because you convinced them Jack's claim was illegal," Kath shot back. "You said he was squatting on ranch land, using stolen water. But the water was never yours to give away. The whole complaint was built on lies." More townspeople had crowded in, straining to hear. Kath recognized faces from church, from the harvest supper. The baker's wife whispered to her neighbor. The blacksmith crossed his arms, frowning at the deputy. Jack's voice rumbled through the tension. "That baby belongs with us. We're the only family she's got. And now you know our claim is legal, backed by deeded water rights older than half the folks in this room." Judge Morrison stroked his chin, studying the gathered crowd. "This requires proper consideration. I'll convene a hearing at sunrise, 8 o'clock sharp. Deputy, have the child brought back from the agency. Until then—" He paused, looking between Kath and Jack. "There's a spare room above the mercantile. Mrs. Peters keeps it for travelers. You can wait there." But Judge Grayson started to protest. "That's my ruling," Morrison cut him off. "Sunrise hearing. Have the child here, or I'll know why not." He nodded to Kath. "Keep that deed safe, Miss Mayfield. We'll need it in the morning." The crowd began to disperse, but Kath caught the changing looks directed her way. No longer mockery or dismissal. Now there was curiosity, even respect. The woman they'd laughed at as the fat one had revealed herself a force to be reckoned with. Mrs. Peters herself led them to the spare room, providing clean blankets and a lamp. "There's fresh water in the pitcher," she said kindly. "Try to rest. Morning will come soon enough." But rest proved impossible. Kath sat in the room's single chair, holding the deed in her lap, while Jack paced the creaking floorboards. Every hour that struck from the town clock was another hour without Anna. Was she crying? Was she afraid? Did anyone hold her when she woke in the darkness? "She must be so frightened," Kath whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks. Jack stopped pacing to kneel beside her chair. "You're bringing her home," he said firmly. "Your courage, your father's foresight. It's all coming together. That deputy thought he could bully us off our land, steal our child. But he didn't reckon on you, Kath Mayfield." She managed a wobbly smile, touching his scarred cheek. "On us. He didn't reckon on us." Through the window, they watched the stars wheel overhead. The lamp burned low. Somewhere in the shadowed streets, people whispered about the mountain man's woman who'd marched into the jailhouse at midnight, armed with nothing but an old deed and unshakable determination. When the town clock struck 4, Jack insisted Kath try to sleep. "You'll need your strength tomorrow," he said, spreading a blanket on the narrow bed. "I'll keep watch." She lay down, still clutching the document case. Though her body ached with exhaustion, her mind raced with arguments and prayers. Please, she thought desperately, please let this work. Please bring our baby home. The first pale light of dawn found her already awake, straightening her wrinkled dress. Jack helped her rebraid her hair, his big hands surprisingly gentle. Together they watched the sun rise over the eastern mountains. painting the town in shades of gold and promise. "Whatever happens," Jack said quietly, "I'm proud to stand beside you." Kath squared her shoulders, holding the deed close. In a few hours, they would face the judge, the deputy, and all the watching town. But she was no longer afraid. She had truth on her side, love in her heart, and Jack at her back. From the street below came the sound of wagons, boots on wooden walkways, voices gathering. The town was waking, preparing to witness what the sunrise hearing would bring. Kath took a deep breath, touching the document case like a talisman. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "We're coming for you." The autumn sun crept over the mountains, painting the courthouse windows in amber light. Already the benches were filling, townsfolk pressing shoulder to shoulder in the cramped space. Farmers in clean shirts sat beside their wives, who smoothed their best skirts and whispered behind raised hands. Ranchers lounged against the back wall, their boots scuffing the wooden floor. Kath stood at the front, her heart hammering against her ribs. The deed lay secure in its leather case, clutched tight in her trembling fingers. Beside her, Jack's presence steadied her like a mountain at her back. His face was stern, but his eyes kept drifting to the small basket near their feet where baby Anna slept, brought back from the agency just moments before. Judge Morrison sat behind his high desk reviewing papers in the strengthening morning light. His spectacles caught the sun as he looked up, surveying the packed room. "This hearing will come to order," he announced, voice cutting through the murmurs. "We're here to determine custody of the child known as Anna and to address certain claims regarding water rights in the Upper Valley." Deputy Grayson stood at the opposite table, his badge gleaming. Behind him sat Rancher Crowell, face pinched with barely contained fury. The deputy adjusted his collar and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of public welfare," Grayson began. "These people are wholly unfit to raise a child. The woman was sold at auction, hardly a proper mother figure. The man is a wild mountain dweller with no standing in proper society. And the child herself," he paused dramatically. "Well, we all know her unfortunate background." Mutters rippled through the crowd. Kath felt her cheeks burn, but she held her head high. Jack's hand brushed her elbow, a silent gesture of support. "Furthermore," the deputy continued, "they're squatting on contested land, using water rights that rightfully belong to established ranching interests. The child deserves a proper Christian upbringing in the agency orphanage, not some isolated cabin in the hills." Judge Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You've made your opening argument, Deputy. Mr. Boone, would you care to respond?" Jack stepped forward, his voice steady and clear in the hushed room. "Your Honor, I've lived honest on that land for 8 years, built every log of that cabin with my own hands. When my friend died, Anna's father, I promised to care for his child. She was just a tiny thing, wouldn't take a bottle. But Kath," his voice roughened with emotion, "Kath knew just what to do. That baby started thriving the moment she arrived." He gestured to the sleeping infant. "Look at her yourself, Judge. Clean, well-fed, loved. She laughs now, reaches for us, knows she's safe. What more could any child need?" The judge leaned forward, studying the peaceful baby. "And the water rights issue?" Kath stepped forward, opening the leather case with careful fingers. "Your Honor, I have here a deed filed by my father, Jerome Mayfield, in 1853. She handed the document up to the bench. "It clearly shows his legal purchase of water rights to 5 springs in the Upper Valley, including the one by Jack's cabin. These rights were never sold or transferred. As his only heir remaining in the territory, they belong to me." A buzz of surprise went through the crowd. Deputy Grayson's face flushed dark red. "That paper could be forged." "It is not forged," Judge Morrison cut in sharply. "I remember Jerome Mayfield well, an honorable man who always kept proper records. He held the deed up to the light. The witnessing signatures are genuine. The filing date precedes any other claims to those waters." Rancher Crowell surged to his feet. "This is outrageous, that land dash." "Was never yours to claim," the judge interrupted. "The water rights determine grazing access in that sector, as you well know, Mr. Crowell. If Miss Mayfield holds legal title to the spring, then Mr. Boone's cabin and grazing rights are perfectly legitimate under her authority. The rancher subsided, glowering. Deputy Grayson shifted uneasily. But the child, Your Honor. Surely you can't allow Dash. I'm not finished, Kath said, her quiet voice carrying to every corner. Heads turned, some surprised to hear such strength from the woman they'd once mocked. This isn't just about water or land. This is about love. About family. That baby girl needs both. And she has them with us. She stepped closer to the bench, emotion making her words ring with truth. You want to talk about Christian duty? What's more Christian than taking in an orphaned child, then looking past the color of her skin to see the precious soul God gave her? We love her. We're ready to raise her with both dignity and faith. Her voice broke slightly. Please, Your Honor. Her whole life depends on this moment. The room had gone completely still. Even the deputy seemed to have run out of arguments. Judge Morrison removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly while he considered. The morning sun streamed through the windows, touching Anna's dark hair with gold as she slept on, unaware of how her fate hung in the balance. At last, the judge replaced his spectacles and sat straight in his chair. I've heard enough, he declared. Deputy Grayson, your removal of this child was an overreach of authority based on false premises about land claims. The water rights evidence clearly establishes the legitimacy of Mr. Boone's homestead. He turned his stern gaze to the deputy. Furthermore, I find your arguments about the fitness of these guardians to be without merit and tainted by prejudice. Grayson started to protest, but Morrison held up his hand. My ruling is this. Custody of the child known as Anna will remain with Mr. Boone and Miss Mayfield. The water rights documented in Jerome Mayfield's deed are hereby confirmed as belonging to his daughter Catherine. Any interference with either the child or the property rights will be dealt with severely by this court. He struck his gavel. So ordered. For a moment, silence held. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone began to clap. The sound spread, scattered applause growing stronger as more hands joined in. Kath swayed, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clutched the deed to her chest. Jack's strong arm went around her shoulders, his voice rough with emotion. You did it, Kath. You really did it. She turned to the basket, lifting Anna into her arms. The baby woke with a sleepy coo, snuggling into Kath's shoulder as naturally as breathing. Looking up through her tears, Kath saw faces in the crowd that had once sneered, now nodding with approval. The baker's wife smiled warmly. The blacksmith touched his hat in respect. Deputy Grayson stormed out, Rancher Crowell close behind. But Kath barely noticed. She was too busy memorizing this moment. The weight of the baby in her arms, the solid presence of Jack beside her, the morning sun blessing them all with its light. As they made their way out of the courthouse, townspeople stepped aside, creating a path. Some even reached out to touch Anna's blanket or pat Jack's shoulder. On the porch, autumn leaves danced in the breeze, red and gold against the blue sky. Kath breathed deeply, feeling the shift in her world. Where there had been mockery, now she saw respect. Where there had been loneliness, now she had family. Jack helped her up into the mule cart, handling her as carefully as fine china despite her solid frame. He tucked a blanket around her and the baby before climbing up himself. Taking the reins, he turned to her with a smile that made her heart skip. Ready to go home? He asked softly. Kath looked down at Anna, then at the deed secure in its case, and finally at the man beside her, her unexpected champion, who had seen her worth when no one else would. Yes, she whispered. Let's go home. The cart creaked into motion, wheels turning toward the mountain trail. Behind them, the town buzzed with the morning's events. Ahead lay their cabin, their spring, their future. The mule plodded steadily forward as their little family, whole and secure at last, began the journey home. The journey home from town had taken most of the day. As dusk settled over the mountains, the cabin's familiar shape emerged from lengthening shadows. Kath felt her shoulders relax at the sight. After all they'd been through, this place truly felt like home now. Jack helped her down from the cart, his calloused hands gentle on her waist. Best get a fire going, he said, looking at the darkening sky. Night's coming on fast. Inside, Kath moved with purpose, lighting the lamp and stoking the hearth while Jack brought in their supplies. The baby dozed peacefully in her basket, exhausted from the day's excitement. Warm light soon filled the cabin, chasing away shadows and bringing out the rich amber tones of the log walls. "I'll fetch that rabbit I snared yesterday," Kath said, reaching for her shawl. "We ought to have ourselves a proper victory supper." Jack nodded, but his eyes followed her with concern. "You've done enough for one day." "I can get it." "Nonsense," she replied, smiling. "My legs need stretching after that long ride." She paused at the door, watching as he unpacked tools from his leather satchel. "What are you planning?" He laid out a saw plane and handful of nails. "Figured it's time Anna had a proper cradle." "Got some good pine boards stored in the lean-to." Kath's heart warmed at his words. She hurried to check the rabbit stored safely in the cold box behind the cabin. Back inside, she set about preparing their feast while Jack worked at his carpentry. The familiar rhythm of cooking settled her spirit. She mixed cornmeal and the last of their flour with careful hands, working by the glow of the lamp. The rabbit she seasoned with dried herbs from her bundle, remembering her mother's lessons about wild sage and thyme. As she worked, baby Anna woke with happy gurgles. Kath scooped her up one-handed, balancing the child on her hip while she continued cooking. "There's my sweet girl," she crooned. "Did you have good dreams?" The baby reached for her face, tiny fingers patting her cheek. From his work spot near the hearth, Jack looked up at the sound of Anna's laughter. His expression softened, and Kath caught her breath at the tenderness there. His hands moved steadily, shaping the pine boards with careful precision. Curls of wood gathered at his feet as he planed each piece smooth. The quiet scrape of tools and crack of the fire made a peaceful melody with Anna's occasional coos. "Smells mighty fine," Jack commented as the rabbit began to brown. Kath had settled Anna in her basket nearby, where the baby contentedly played with a wooden spoon. "It's not much," Kath replied modestly, "but we've cause to celebrate, don't we?" Jack set down his plane, brushing sawdust from his shirt. "That we do." He studied the cradle's emerging shape. "Reckon we can make this place proper now. A real home." The words hung in the air between them, full of meaning. Kath busied herself with the bread, hoping he wouldn't notice her flushed cheeks. When supper was ready, they sat together at the small table. The rabbit was tender, falling off the bone, and the bread still warm from the Dutch oven. Lamplight cast a gentle glow over their meal, making even the simple tin plates seem special. For the first time since Kath had arrived, laughter came easily to them both. They talked of small things, how Anna had charmed the judge with her sleeping face, the way Deputy Grayson had stormed out in defeat. Jack even attempted a gruff imitation of Rancher Crowell's blustering, making Kath nearly choke on her bread with surprised mirth. After they'd cleared the plates, Jack cleared his throat awkwardly. He stood by the half-finished cradle, running his hand along its smooth edge. "I never properly thanked you," he said quietly, "for what you did today. Your courage saved everything. The baby, the land, all of it." Kath ducked her head, smoothing her apron. "The Lord gave me strength," she murmured. "I just did what needed doing." "No," Jack insisted. "You did more than that. You stood up to them all with dignity, made them see the truth." He paused, searching for words. "I've known men who'd back down from less. But you just kept going, steady as a mountain stream." His praise warmed her more deeply than the fire. "Well," she said softly, "I had something worth fighting for, didn't I?" Their eyes met across the room and something unspoken passed between them. Jack moved to add wood to the fire, and they settled in their usual spots, Kath in her rocking chair, Jack on his low stool. The flames crackled and danced as they talked long into the night. Their conversation wandered like a gentle stream, touching on dreams they'd barely dared voice before. Kath spoke of planting a vegetable garden come spring, maybe adding some flowers for color. Jack described the perfect spot for a chicken coop, sheltered from wind and fox alike. "We could expand the cabin too," he suggested. "Add another room off the back. Give Anna her own space as she grows." Kath's needle flashed in the firelight as she mended one of his shirts. "That would be fine," she agreed, "though she's perfect company right where she is now." As if hearing her name, the baby stirred in her basket. Before Kath could move, Jack was there, lifting Anna with surprising gentleness. He cradled her against his chest, his big hand patting her back with practiced ease. Kath's fingers stilled on her sewing as she watched them. The firelight softened Jack's scarred face, revealing the tenderness that lived beneath his gruff exterior. Anna snuggled into his beard, making the tiny snuffling sounds that meant she was drifting back to sleep. "She knows she's safe with you," Kath said quietly. Jack looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "With us," he corrected. "She knows she's safe with us." The night deepened around the cabin, stars wheeling in their ancient paths overhead. Inside, the lamp burned low as the fire settled to glowing coals. Kath's heart felt full to bursting with gratitude. 3 weeks ago, she had stood trembling in an auction yard, certain her life was over. Now she sat in a warm cabin, watching a man she was coming to love rock their baby to sleep. The Lord's mercy, she thought, truly passed understanding. Jack laid Anna in her basket one last time, tucking the quilt around her with careful hands. "Best get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow's soon enough for everything else." Kath nodded, gathering her sewing. But she paused by the hearth, looking at their small family, the sleeping baby, the half-built cradle, the man who had seen worth in her when others saw only flaws. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bidding that day, for seeing me." Jack's hand found hers in the dim light, rough palm against her work-worn fingers. "No," he said simply. "Thank you for staying, for making this a home." They parted for sleep, each to their own space in the cabin. But something had shifted, settled into place like the final piece of a puzzle. They were no longer just three lonely souls sharing space. They were a family, bound by choice and love and the mercy of God. Outside, a cool mountain breeze whispered through pine boughs. Inside, peace reigned as Kath drifted toward sleep, her heart overflowing with gratitude for all that had changed since that dusty auction yard just weeks ago. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, painting golden squares on the rough-hewn floor. Kath hummed softly as she measured flour into her wooden bowl, her movements sure and practiced. The familiar scent of yeast filled the kitchen corner, promising fresh bread for their meal. Baby Anna toddled across the room, one chubby hand steadying herself against the wall. Her dark curls bounced with each determined step. "Mama," she called out, reaching for Kath's skirts. The word so recently learned still brought tears to Kath's eyes. She wiped her hands on her apron and scooped up the little one, pressing a kiss to her warm cheek. "That's right, sweetheart. Mama's here." From above came the steady rhythm of Jack's hammer as he worked on the roof. Autumn was settling in, and he'd discovered several loose shingles that needed securing before winter storms arrived. The solid sounds of his work filled Kath with contentment, the security of a man tending to his home. She set Anna back down with a carved wooden horse Jack had made her. "Now you stay right there where I can see you, little miss," she said, returning to her bread-making. The morning passed in peaceful industry. Kath shaped 3 plump loaves, setting them near the hearth to rise. Jack's boots thumped on the ladder as he climbed down from the roof, and his shadow fell across the doorway. "Roof's sound now," he announced, ducking inside. "Should keep us dry through spring." He reached for the water dipper, taking a long drink. Anna immediately abandoned her toy, crawling toward him with determination. "Papa!" she called out, arms raised in imperious demand. Jack's weathered face creased in a smile. He swung her up high, earning a delighted squeal. "There's my girl," he said gruffly. "Keeping your mama company while I work?" Kath watched them together, her heart full. The sight of this strong man so gentle with their little one never failed to move her. His scarred hands held Anna as if she were made of finest china. Their laughter rang out across the yard as Jack carried Anna outside to help him stack firewood. Kath moved to the door to watch them, shading her eyes against the bright sky. Jack made a game of it, letting Anna hand him small sticks while he arranged the larger logs. But even in this peaceful moment, Kath couldn't forget the lingering threat. Rancher Crowell wasn't a man to accept defeat gracefully. Though they'd won their legal battle, she knew his pride had been wounded. Such men could be dangerous. Jack seemed to share her concerns. He'd been methodically building up their supplies. Extra flour, salt pork, dried beans. The woodpile grew daily, insurance against whatever winter might bring. They hadn't spoken of it directly, but Kath understood. They needed to be ready for anything. While the bread rose, Kath settled at the table with paper and pencil. She'd put off writing to her sisters, scattered across 3 territories, but they deserved to know she was safe. More than safe. She was home. "Dearest Mary and Beth," she began, the pencil scratching softly. "I pray this finds you both well. You'll be surprised, perhaps, to learn where God's path has led me." She wrote steadily, telling them of Jack's kindness, of precious baby Anna, of the spring that had proved their salvation. "I know you feared for me," she wrote, "but the Lord had better plans than we could see. I've found not just shelter, but a true home, a family." The afternoon sun was westering when she finished. She sealed the letter carefully, setting it aside to mail when they next went to town. Outside, Jack had finished with the wood and was checking the fences, Anna dozing in a makeshift sling across his chest. Kath pulled the fresh bread from the oven, its golden crust crackling, the cabin filled with the homey scent. Setting the loaves to cool, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. Her feet carried her to the spring, its clear water bubbling up from deep in the earth. She knelt beside it, touching the cool surface gently. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for bringing me here, for giving me a chance at joy." The sun was setting when she returned to prepare their supper. Jack had laid Anna in her basket and was washing up at the basin. Something in his manner seemed different, tense yet expectant. They ate their meal quietly at first, venison stew, fresh bread, the last of the summer's preserved peaches. Anna sat in her little chair between them, more interested in crumbling her bread than eating it. Finally, Jack cleared his throat. He reached across the table, his big hand covering hers. "Kath," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been thinking." She stilled, her heart suddenly racing. "You've stood by me like no one else," he continued, the words coming slowly but with deep sincerity. "Through all of it, the baby, the fight for the spring. You've made this place a real home." He paused, swallowing hard. "Will you stay?" "For good. Be my wife?" Tears sprang to Kath's eyes, blurring her vision. Joy bubbled up inside her like the spring water. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay." His hand tightened on hers. "We can ride to town next week," he said. "See the pastor. Do it proper." Kath nodded, unable to speak past the happiness filling her throat. Anna chose that moment to drop her spoon with a clatter, breaking the tension. They both laughed, and Jack reached over to ruffle the baby's dark curls. "Hear that, little one?" he said softly. "Your mama's staying for good." They cleaned up together, moving in the comfortable rhythm they'd developed. Jack banked the fire while Kath put Anna to bed, singing her favorite hymn softly. Outside, wolves began their evening chorus, their howls echoing across the ridges. But Kath felt no fear. The sound that had once seemed so threatening now felt like part of the night's natural music. She stood at the cabin door, watching darkness settle over their little valley. Jack's arm slipped around her waist, solid and warm. The lamp behind them cast a golden glow, making their home a beacon of light against the gathering night. "I never thought I'd find this," she said quietly. "A place where I truly belong." "You belonged here from the first day," Jack replied. "I just had to convince you of it." They shared a smile, remembering that dusty auction yard that seemed so long ago now. God's mercy, Kath thought, worked in mysterious ways. What had seemed like an ending had been a beginning instead. The lamp burned steady behind them, filling their cabin with warmth that defied the darkness outside. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, in this moment, all was well. Their little family was complete, bound together by love, stronger than any legal document or social convention. Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Come inside, wife-to-be," he said. "It's getting cold." Kath followed him in, closing the door on the night. The wolves sang on, but their song was just part of the evening's peace now, a reminder that they were home, together, safe in the shelter they'd built with love and trust and faith. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear as Jack hitched the mule to their cart. Kath wrapped baby Anna in her warmest blanket, tucking her securely against the morning chill. The little family set out for town, the wooden wheels creaking along the familiar trail. At the white-painted church, Pastor Matthews met them at the door. His kind eyes crinkled as he smiled, remembering their steadfast faith during the courthouse battle. "The Lord's grace brings you here today," he said, warmly. Sunlight filtered through the simple stained glass windows, casting gentle colors across the wooden pews. A handful of townsfolk filled the seats, some still wearing doubt on their faces, but others offering genuine smiles. Jack stood tall beside Kath, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. Anna, settled in Mrs. Peterson's arms, let out a happy gurgle just as they finished, making everyone chuckle. Afterward, the small gathering shared fresh cornbread and hot coffee in the churchyard. Kath's plain dress might not have been fancy, but she felt beautiful in Jack's loving gaze. His work-roughened hand held hers firmly, a constant anchor of support. As twilight painted the sky in soft purples, they began the journey home. Kath watched the passing landscape, marveling at how the same road that once echoed with cruel laughter now carried her towards such joy. At their cabin, Jack carefully lifted her down from the cart. "Welcome home, wife," he whispered tenderly. Kath leaned into his embrace, happy tears sparkling in her eyes. Near the porch, Anna clapped her tiny hands in delight. Inside, the lamp cast its warm glow as Jack built up the hearth fire. Their family circle was complete, a miracle born of faith, courage, and unconditional love. Winter's icy grip settled over the highlands, blanketing their world in deep snow. Inside the snug cabin, Kath tended the crackling fire and filled the air with the sweet scent of fresh-baked bread. Her gentle voice lifted in hymns while she rocked baby Anna, who cooed along in her own special way. Jack spent his days chopping endless cords of wood and tracking deer through the drifts. His hands stayed busy repairing snowshoes by lamplight, preparing for the long season ahead. When letters finally arrived from Kath's sisters weeks later, their pages held wonder at her transformed life. "We can hardly believe it," they wrote. "We'll come see for ourselves when spring breaks." One fierce night, as a blizzard howled like hungry wolves, Jack stumbled out to fetch water from the spring. When he didn't return quickly, Kath found him nearly frozen in the snow. She dragged his large frame inside with strength born of desperation. Through the night, she spooned warm broth past his blue lips and prayed without ceasing. His recovery humbled him deeply. Together, they knelt by the hearth, giving thanks for mercy granted. Though winter winds battered their cabin walls, their home held strong. Laughter and love grew deeper through each trial faced together. When the storm finally broke, Kath stepped out with Anna bundled close. The pristine landscape glittered like diamonds in the sun. Standing there, breathing in the crisp air, she felt the full weight of belonging. At last, her life held true meaning and permanence. Spring arrived like a gentle blessing, painting the mountain meadows in vibrant greens. Outside their cabin, Kath knelt in the fresh earth, carefully planting rows of vegetables. Her strong hands pressed each seed into the dark soil, while baby Anna tottered beside her, squealing with delight at every seed planted. Jack hammered steadily nearby, building a solid chicken coop from pine boards. His weathered face softened whenever Anna's laughter rang out across their homestead. The following Sunday, they drove their mule cart into town. At church, faces that once showed scorn now offered warm smiles. Kath's pies vanished from the bake sale table within moments, and women who had mocked her size now crowded around, eager to learn her baking secrets. Deputy Grayson kept his distance, shame evident in his downcast eyes. The rancher Crowell was notably absent, having abandoned his claims to their spring after his defeat. After the service, the pastor called their family forward. Before the entire congregation, he blessed them, bringing tears to Kath's eyes. On the journey home, she gazed at the familiar mountains, her heart overflowing with gratitude. That evening, lamplight spilled golden through their cabin windows. Jack gently rocked Anna to sleep while Kath sat close beside him, her hand resting on his strong arm. "They laughed once," Jack whispered. "Let them laugh again, I'll stand by you forever." Kath's tears glistened in the soft light as she answered, and I'll never leave your side." The cabin glowed like a beacon in the gathering dusk, a testament to love, faith, and family, triumphant against all odds. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.